Hi, everyone. This is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our Facebook group, our YouTube channel, and our newsletter. And our great sponsors, Abiativa Casa, Italy Rooting, and Phil Italy. And my guest today is Stephanie Denton, who is the creator and the host of the podcast Italian American Stories. So welcome, Stephanie. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Bob. It's nice to see you, and thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to it since I did your podcast. It's nice to do a reciprocal one. So
Definitely. Got to support each other, right?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I certainly want to talk about the podcast and some of the great stories and interviews that you've done. But before we do that, what's your heritage background?
So my family, they are primarily from the Potenza, Basilicata, Italy. And I do have some from Salerno, but primarily from Potenza. And I'm so excited. I'm going there this summer. I can't wait. Going to spend some time. We're going to do a little bit of Matera and then go down to Potenza. Yeah, so they came over. My earliest ancestor came over and just kind of settled in Colorado around the 1870s, which is pretty early. But then my great grandparents came over like 1890. So, and they did a quick stop in New York and jumped on over to Denver. So I think they were going for the mining and all of that.
Yeah, in 1890s, that's still pretty early. I mean, that's before the wave. Do you know, because, my good friend, Joe Tucciarone, he wrote, co-authored the book, Swindle to New York. And that was about a lot of the Italians who originally thought they were going to go to South America and were kind of dumped off in New York. And then, they just found work. I guess, the mines and places needed jobs. So do you know if your ancestors were caught up in any of that?
I had on my maternal great grandmother's side, she had her brother settled in somewhere South America. I want to say Argentina, but don't quote me on that. Maybe Brazil. I don't know. He settled there, but I think they intentionally went to New York because my great great grandfather, sorry, Rocco Smaldone, he had an aunt that lived in New York. And just from the records, I think they stayed there maybe a month or two and then headed out to meet his uncle who had settled in Colorado 20 years ago. So maybe the first uncle that came over kind of got swept up in that. I'm not sure. But as far as like my great grandparents, and I think they were intentionally headed to Colorado.
Yeah, and people don't realize that the Italians were out in Colorado long before anybody would have thought.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating. I do so much research for my podcast, and a lot of my research started by researching my own family and finding some of these articles from late 1800s about Italian Americans. They are fascinating. And even in like tiny little towns, because we have little mountain towns, as every state has little towns everywhere that were just mining hubs. And they had their own little papers. And it's, fascinating to see the articles that they would write about Italians. I mean, some of them were obviously not favorable. They would call them Dago Town or whatever, but very fascinating. Like you said, they've been in these towns for a long time.
Yeah. No, that's it really is truly amazing. So within your family, have you found any like really interesting stories from the past?
I have. So if you know anything about Denver, the Smaldone name is kind of affiliated with the mob well, they are the mob family in Denver way back in the day. So, but there's different branches of the Smaldone family. So it's always fascinating researching the Smaldones in Denver because you come up with some pretty interesting stuff. But I found some pretty cool things. Like I found where my first, I think it was my great uncle, maybe great uncle, the one who settled in Colorado in 1870s. He actually started a baseball team with Italians. And so just really cool stuff.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
He got in a bar fight one time, or saloon fight, I guess you could call it back then. And he got cut like right here. And so he grew out this huge handlebar mustache. And in all the photos that I found of him, he's got this massive handlebar mustache to cover up the scars. So everything from baseball to saloon fights, anywhere in between.
It sounds more American than Italian, right?
Well, 1870s in Colorado's, we were truly the Wild West.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible. So now he worked in the mines?
He did for a little while, and then he moved into the city, and they were fruit peddlers. They rented out part of their house. And it's funny now because it's Denver, like city Denver, but they had horses that they would sell. They raised, horses and had an orchard and stuff. So I think he was there for a while, but not very long.
Yeah, and I mean, I get Denver must have been a really, really small place back then.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's, you had like the kind of the two central areas, and then everything else was just farm. So, and
Yeah,
ranches.
but it must have felt like home to, the people from the Basilicata region because of the mountains and all of that
Yeah,
stuff. So now this trip that is this your first trip back?
it
Have you been
is.
there before?
I've never been there. So
Boy, you're gonna be blown away.
I'm very excited. We're gonna spend a little time in the North area. We want to see the Coliseum, some of that stuff, but we're primarily headed south. So gotta see the ancestral villages.
Yeah, well, if you haven't been to Rome, yeah, definitely it's worth the stop. But you have to buy the tickets now online in advance. We found that out the hard way.
For the Coliseum?
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
to know. Okay.
Yeah, the first time we went like 30 years ago, really, I mean, we went in August, so Rome was kind of pretty empty because the Italians all go on vacation, but you could just walk up to a ticket booth and get the tickets and walk right in. There was hardly anybody there. But now we went, last time we went a few years ago, yeah, you have to have the tickets in advance and they coordinate everything. And even, the South isn't so much like that, but Rome and then like when we went to Florence, you had to have tickets to see the David, you have tickets for that, and tickets for this, all worth it in advance. So
Sure.
you have to get it in advance. But Matera is really quite a place. I mean, that's a really, one of the most amazing places we've ever been to.
I'm so excited. And it's about 60 miles, I think, from Potenza. So, which is where my family came from, but we're definitely stopping in Matera. It's, I think, one of the oldest cities on record.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those national heritage type places or something like that. I forget the exact
Yeah.
verbiage. But yeah, it goes back at least 5 or 6,000 years where people were living in the caves and what really blew us away was there were people living in caves there up until the 1960s.
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And now I think, don't they have like Airbnbs and hotels in
Mhm.
the caves? So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We did go down. We did I don't know if we I don't think we went all the way down to the bottom, but the modern town is up high, and then you walk down. But there's one museum that's a cave. It's like a 2-room cave, and they kind of show how the people lived. And it was
Mm.
the people lived in one part, and the animals were in the other part. I mean, it was like everything was together.
Was just right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Uh, it was fascinating, really fascinating. So now, have you done DNA testing at all?
I have. Yep.
Yes. Anything interesting there?
I mean, I knew my mom's the Italian one, my dad's not, so I knew that it would be there, but no, not really. When it first came back, it said I was Sardinian, whatever, however you say that. And then they updated it. That went away, and I was, the Italian came. But no, it was, yeah, nothing too surprising there for me at all. A little bit of Greek, but again, that's not too surprising when you think of the region and the area. So yeah, but my mom and my aunt did it, and they both got, I don't know if you've done Ancestry DNA, where it
Yeah.
can get you to the, they got them to the towns and the regions. So I thought that was really cool in Potenza.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty neat. And so, how about your father's family? Have they been out in the West for a long time too?
So my father was actually born in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. So kind of Midwestish, sort of Southern, but then he moved to Denver, and that's where he met my mom.
That's got to be a cool place to come from, Broken Arrow.
Yeah, have you ever been?
I've never been.
Oh my gosh.
My only time in Oklahoma was like 50 years ago. We drove through there. We drove around out to the west and drove back, and whatever time it took to get through Oklahoma, that was our only.
It's great. You can catch lightning bugs in jars, and it's a cool place. It's very humid and hot, but it's really cool.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before. traveling with a scheduled group, or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.co. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, no, it's where you from? I'm from Broken Arrow.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's a
Yeah,
great
I've
place.
actually done. I want to do a story of some Oklahomans, Italian Oklahomans, but they're you have to dig for some of those.
Yeah, yeah. I guess Oklahoma wasn't the first stop, but again, we're everywhere, and people don't realize that. People don't realize that.
Absolutely.
Especially us from New York. We all think all the Italians just stayed in New York. So let's talk about the podcast. I mean, what got you started with that? Why'd you do that?
Well, honestly, genealogy is what drove me into it. And I've always loved my being Italian and my family and researching them. And so I'd do ancestry and then I'd get on the newspaper databases and search for my family. Well, I would randomly run across articles about Italian Americans who I'm not related to. I have no idea who they are, but I was like, wow, that's a really cool story. So I'd print it off or save it to my computer. And then I realized, I think we were moving probably, and I realized I had all these articles of Italian Americans, again, that I'm not related to. I don't know. And I'm like, what am I going to do with these? And that's kind of how it started. I was like, this is a really cool story. I wonder if there's more. And I first thought about doing a book, but it's a hard undertaking. But I've always listened to podcasts. And so I thought, well, I could take these stories of people that, they're not famous in the sense of Joe DiMaggio and stuff, but I could still tell their story. And so that's how it started.
Yeah, and that's kind of similar to me. I started with the blog at first, and I was writing about what I found and my family and things like that. And that was fun for a while, but it was just one way conversation, if you know what I mean. It was just
Yeah,
me, blathering on or whatever. And that was the same thing, kind of almost the same thing where I said, there's got to be other people out there with really interesting stories. Um, just regular people, because we all see the shows, Frank Sinatra's family
yeah,
and Joe DiMaggio's family and all that kind of stuff. But that's really only one part of the story, right?
absolutely. I completely agree. Um, I mean, and that's what I try to focus on is this other part, those everyday Americans that came over here and made a life, whether it turned out great. They succeeded, left a legacy for their family. Sometimes they ended up in prison, but I wanted to still tell those stories. So, because I like the very first one that got me, if I could say anything that sparked my podcast, would be the story of Angelina Garamoni. And she was the very first episode that I did, which I need to redo because it's pretty rough. When you first start
Tell
podcasting,
me
you're
about
like,
it.
I listen back and I'm like, oh my gosh. So got to redo that one. But she was fascinating. I mean, she had like a little empire going on in Denver. She was a real estate guru, but she also got in a little bit of trouble. She murdered a couple of people, did some fraud. But the way that they depicted her in the papers, they referred to her as like a strega, black hand. And it was just like her story was phenomenal. She ended up in prison, but but there's so much of our culture that is within that story. That I feel like it has a place in our history.
Yeah, yeah. I've come across a few stories like that where somebody murdered somebody or something like that. But most fascinating thing that I found out, if they're all doing all of these years, I hadn't spoken to my cousin Lou in, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. And we connected again over one of the interviews I did for somebody in Corona. And he said, you know the story of our great grandmother? And I said, no, what story? He said, when he was real young, like maybe teenager, he used to walk in the room and his mother and my grandmother would stop talking. And he said, after I came back from the Korean War, I kind of pressed the issue. And he, he said that our great grandmother, believe it was her sister, got pregnant by some guy in Italy. And she said, well, you need to take care of it. And she said, well, I wanted to, but he won't marry me. So she says, well, then you have to take care of it another way. And she said, well, I can't do that. So apparently my great grandmother knocked this guy off. I don't know how, but he wasn't doing the right thing. So she took care of it.
She took care of it. Man, it is pretty fascinating what you can dig up if you start looking.
Yeah. And I wasn't even looking, but I think that's the point. I mean, some things just kind of fall in your lap, right?
They do. Absolutely. Yeah. I could go for the true crime all the time, the murder mysteries, that kind of stuff, but I do mix it up. I just did a recent episode about Lucille Colosito here in Denver, and she was a female baseball player during World War II. And she traveled with the Wisconsin, the Kenosha Comets. And I don't know if you've ever seen A League of Their Own, that
Yeah, sure.
movie. And so she was in that time frame. And so, I try to mix it up, but have some good and some bad and some fun stories, but
That's a neat story. So how do you find these stories? Did you just go through old newspapers or search for old articles and stuff?
Yep, pretty much. Every once in a while something will pop up, like Lucille Colosito, that popped up on Instagram. And I was like, oh, hey, that's great. But I can't pull out my binders, but I have binders of articles that I've ran across. And so I just, yeah, pretty much just search. I'll type in different key phrases like, Denver Italian kidnapping. Like, it's really, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, type in kidnapping with Italian Americans. It's very terrifying. And I'm sure it was, every ethnicity and all that. But yeah, so I just, I'll do different key phrases. I've got a few books that I love to look through. Like, this is a really old book from the 20s, and was written by Italian Americans, and it's just got great little snippets, advertisements in it. Like, there was a advertisement for Joseph Bona, and he was a mortician who worked in Denver. And so I started researching him, and he had a great story. He was actually the mortician that embalmed Buffalo Bill Cody when he died.
Ah.
And there's this great part where, they couldn't get him down the stairs because he was such a tall guy. And so it was hilarious. They had to fold him in half and carry him down. And it's just, like, our Italian American, we had a little part in that, is in Buffalo Bill's history. So yeah, it's a lot of research. There's times where I actually feel like I'm kind of back in college. I'm researching and then I'm typing up basically a paper, for my script, but I love it. So it doesn't feel like that too much. Every once in a while, I'm like, what am I doing to myself here?
Yeah, I know. Just I kind of started branching out a little bit. I finally got monetized on YouTube.
Yay! Congratulations! That's a huge accomplishment.
So long, and not to bore everybody, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for
Um,
it.
but no, I did one on the origin of Italian last names, and it's the interviews are pretty easy to do, right? You just talk to
Yeah.
somebody, you do a little editing here and there.
Yeah.
But something like that, it took some time, and yeah, no, it was something because I was hovering around 3,500 hours, and I would go up a little bit, down a little bit, and then this thing, the first day I had like 200 views, and then the next day it was like 1,200. I said, oh wow, this is going someplace here. And in since I published it, I guess around August 20th or 22nd, it's got over 72,000 views.
Wow!
And
Congratulations!
thank you. And it just took off. I mean, it was like really amazing. And I picked up like 12 or 1,300 subscribers in the meantime on top, because of that. So, I'm going to branch out a little bit into some of those kinds of things. But to your point, they're a lot more work,
They are.
to put that together, the research. And then the first one I used AI to narrate, and some people complained. So now it's me narrating. And I said, all right, if you want to hear New Yorkese, that's fine. I'll do it in New Yorkese.
Well, that's a really big, because our niche it's kind of small. So,
It is.
which is a good thing because it's not a oversaturated market, but it has its downfalls. So that's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm getting rich, but it's nice to see a few dollars for, into the till.
It is. Yes, I
And
know.
so one of the things that I don't do, and maybe I should do you look for like, old photos of Italian Americans and things like that?
Yeah, actually, that one's tricky. But I do that because especially when I'm doing my episodes, for my social media to, promote the episode, I want to have pictures. But yeah, no, there's quite a few. And then in October, I always do a post a day about an Italian American, but it's a picture. It's not a write up or anything. And so, no, I do a lot of that searching. Some of that comes from books, the book that I just showed you, magazines, Library of Congress. Sometimes, like if you if you're ever fascinated with Colorado and want to look into it, there's Pueblo Italians. If you type in Pueblo Italians, you can find some pretty funny pictures there. Pueblo, Colorado. There's one guy giving his donkey a beer, and it's pretty funny. But yeah, no, I do that a lot. But I try to, if I'm tying it to my episode, I really got to double check to make sure that that's the correct people and stuff. So, but yeah, I do some photo research.
Yeah, and and whether you're Italian or not Italian, the Library of Congress, it is a really great resource. I grabbed a couple of things from there. I did one on it's I guess it's basically the first mafia movie. It's a
Hmm.
silent. It's about, I don't know, 10 or 12 minutes long or something like that, and they kidnapped the butcher's daughter.
Kidnapping. I told you, kidnapping. It's crazy.
and hold her for ransom, and you see the butchers running around and all of these things. But the other one that's really a cool one is The Making of an American.
Hmm.
And it's a silent, it's about 12 or 13 minutes long too. And it kind of shows this guy who comes to the country, doesn't speak English, and then he goes to English classes and he gets slowly promoted up through the ranks. I mean, it's for the time, it's a very positive story.
Wow, that's surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you found
Uh,
those on the Library of Congress?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And yeah, so there's some neat stuff out there. You could even find, for anybody's interested in silent movies, you could even find some of the first Italian cinemas. And there's another website, I forget the name, but the Italians made some like really long silent movies. Like I'm talking like an hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not out there, but I'll have to look it up. But there's a website that you can kind of, if you type in Italian silent movies, of course it'll pop up. But yeah, they did some like epic things like Dante's Inferno and
Mm,
Nero fiddling when Rome burned, and all of that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Interesting, crazy stuff. For people who want to research their family or research their town or their area for Italian Americans, how do you suggest that they start?
Well, if you want to research your family, you've got to have a little bit of that knowledge. But even if you just want to research Italian Americans, a lot of states have free websites with some newspapers on them. Not every state, but like Colorado has Colorado Historic Newspapers, and you can sign up for free, and it has a ton of resources. And I found that in New York. I think I found Missouri has one. There's another one back east that has one, and they're free. But if you're willing to pay for a subscription, the new newspaper.com, of course. And then there's Genealogy Bank, which I really like also. And, if you know a name, great. You could type that in. You can even type in things like Little Italy and then choose your state. You can dwindle it down by a town. And that's some ways that I start figuring out names because I could do Colorado all day, right? I know the families, I know the areas to search. But if I'm searching Idaho, I'll start with kind of a broader term like Little Italy, and then dwindle it down by towns, and then I just start jotting down names of Italian Americans, and then I go back and I research those names. So, but if you have a specific name, obviously that's going to help you. You know, the one thing about Italians is like if I ever made it big enough to where I could hire a researcher, I think I'd have to hire somebody who really knows Italian Americans' last names because our spelling is all over the place. I mean, like Smaldone, it can be spelled, it's supposed to be Smaldone, but when they said Smaldone back in the day,
Hmm.
they ended it with an A or two L's. So make sure you do those variations. I've done episodes where I check a variation and I find a whole nother rabbit hole to go down on one person because the name was spelled differently. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, I interviewed a guy from West Virginia just recently, and his last name is Pishner.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, "Where'd you come up from Pish? Where's Pishner come from?" And he said, "Oh, no, my real name was Pisciano or something like that." He said, "But that's what I wound up with was Pishner." He thinks it was it's probably Americanized, you know. He thinks it just got like kind of
Yeah.
chopped up and stuff like that, but it may have, for whatever reason, it got him. My neighbor across the street, they were the Collisons, and I didn't know, growing up, I didn't even know they were Italian, but their last name was Colasano and
Mm.
or Colasano, and I think the father was in like advertising or something like that, and I guess he started his career in the 40s or 50s and probably had to, just have an American name.
Yep.
You know,
And that's a good I was actually just gonna bring up that point. There's a branch in the Smaldone family that they changed their last name to not be associated with,
the
with that.
small
So,
downs.
yeah, with the Smaldones. So you've gotta, look at that too, because whether or not they wanted it Americanized for their business or to separate themselves from, stuff that they weren't too proud of. So that's
Yeah.
another thing to look into.
Well, here in New York, it was like, I mean, mafia families, everybody who knew all the mafia families and all the names, and they didn't hide anything, those guys.
Nope.
Yeah, my father worked for the Daily News, the newspaper. He was a photographer, so and he
Mm.
was, he was always taking pictures of this mafia guy and that mafia guy, and some of them didn't want to be in the paper, but there were a couple who, they kind of enjoyed it. They
They
really,
liked
yeah, they like being in the newspaper. So that genealogy bank, I've never used that. I'm gonna have to look into that.
I really like it. I kind of like it a little bit better than newspapers.com. But maybe it's because I feel like it has more papers out west. So maybe that's why I can vibe with it a little bit more, but it's great. They even have an Italian American section. They have, I think, Scottish American. Like they have they'll break it down by papers for you. It's it's great. It's, kind of this basically newspapers.com, but they do have different papers, which is nice. So if you're really trying to search for something.
Yeah, that's good. And I used newspapers.com, and my father's family lived in New Jersey for a while, and then they wound up back in New York. But I found references like, well, obituaries about people in Italy in this little town in New Jersey. I mean, they weren't in like in Newark or a big place. It was a small place, but they had their own local paper, and I guess it was almost like a society page type of thing,
Mm.
and they would put these articles in there. And I found out just recently that where my father was born, Scotch Plains, was kind of an Italian area in New Jersey, and it's a small, tiny little place now. Back then,
Yeah.
there must have been nobody there, maybe just Italians, I don't know. But there was that, and then there were also just little, goofy stories like my aunt motored to Brooklyn, New York to visit family, and that's exactly the way they said it, you know,
Odored.
motored. Well, it's like 1929, so I guess it was a big deal.
Yeah, they were called motor cars then, I think,
Yes, right.
not automobiles or vehicles or cars.
Yeah, and they even had a thing about my father's, I think it was his, I don't know, 5th birthday or something like that. So, like I said, it was probably like whether it was just local news or like a little society page type of thing, I don't know, but it's to you to your point, you could find some interesting stuff
You
in some
can.
of these small little newspapers, and even about your own family, possibly.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And those are fun. I have little segments on the podcast that we call Tells from the Archives. And there's stories kind of like that where I can't research it any more than the one article I found, but it was cool and it was funny, had some sort of an insight. And so I'll do a Tells from the Archives, and they're like 5 or 6 just short little stories. And speaking about obituaries, we just did a Tells from the Archives episode, and we did a family in Tennessee, and she moved back to Italy, but when she died in Italy, they had her obituary in the Tennessee newspaper. So, but she was fascinating. She had a bar, and she wouldn't tell the police who she was buying her stolen whiskey from, and chased people out of the bar with the broom who were being unruly. And so, but it was a cool story. I just couldn't turn it into anything. So we just did a little short mini-sode. But
Oh, that's funny.
yeah,
She wouldn't tell him where she was buying the liquor from.
Yeah. I don't know how they knew it was stolen, but she was like, "I can't remember who I bought that from." And they were like, "Really?" So,
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting too. You just go out and find these little tidbits and stuff like that, and just mentions of people.
yeah.
Um, what's like the either the most fascinating or the weirdest story that you found?
Oh, the weirdest story. I actually wrote some down because I kind of forget the stories after a while. I'd have to say, if you want to go weird, oh, his name was Formica was his last name. Concetto Formica. And they called him the Spaghetti Mummy. And he was in Georgia. And he died in the early like 1920s. So he was at a circus. He worked for the circus. And something happened. He got in a fight with somebody and they drove a tent stake through his head. And yeah, and so he passed away. Obviously, you're not gonna, that's pretty bad. And mortuary couldn't find his family. They were like, we don't know what to do. Well, it was run out of this home in North Carolina. The mortuary was run out of a home. And so they just kept him. And his body, he didn't deteriorate's not the right
Yeah, you
word.
didn't decompose.
He didn't decompose. He kind of mummified, and they kept him in their garage in a glass case
Yeah.
for years and years. And people would come and look at him. And so then the dad, Concetto's father, figured out what happened, and he came and he kind of paid for a few things, and he was going to claim the body. Well, he was walking down the street and was murdered. And so he never came back for the body. So they kept him for another few years. And it was just like, they would like put him on display at Halloween. They would open the garage. I mean, it was just, but they finally I think it was actually a mayor in New York City or just New York somewhere heard about this story and petitioned to have him officially buried. So he is officially buried, but they called him the spaghetti. I want to say the Spaghetti Mummy. I'll have to look back. That's been a few years since I've done that, but that's probably the weirdest story I've ever done.
Yeah, that's pretty strange.
Yeah.
Oh, what's even stranger was the father went to claim the body and then got murdered.
I got murdered. Yeah, like 2 days later, he was murdered, and so he never came back for the body. So crazy. Yeah, he was just
Wow,
mugged on the street.
that is crazy. I mean, I've heard of, a couple of people like they murdered somebody in Italy and then came to America, and I guess basically they got away with it. I guess there was no extradition things, or they didn't know who they were and stuff like that. That's a crazy story though.
It is. It was, yeah, it was. I couldn't believe when I ran across that one. I was like, this can't be real.
I'm gonna have to check that out. I'm gonna have to look for that one and read
I'll
it.
send you
'Cause
the link.
yeah, send me the link. Send me the link and I'll put it in the blog post too. So anybody else who wants to know about the spaghetti mummy, they can
Perfect.
do that.
The next story I'm actually working on. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the next story that I'm hoping to get done to post next week is actually about somebody who murdered somebody in Italy and then moved to Colorado and got into all sorts of trouble. Yeah, but yeah, that happened quite a bit. Like you said, they didn't, and they could just come and change their names too. I mean, there was not really great record keeping then.
Well, yeah, I suppose I guess when they came, I guess they had to have some kind of passport or whatever. But once they were here, and especially in some of these small places, they could just, I guess, just fall into society there, and nobody would ever be any the wiser. There was no DNA or any of that kind of stuff. I guess they had fingerprints back then, but
Yeah,
I doubt if they were looking for somebody in Italy and you came over here, that was the end of it. They were never going to find you.
exactly. Yeah,
And probably the other way around too.
100%.
Probably the other way around too. They would just, if they did something here, they could run back to Italy where they, had family or something like that. So before we go, where can people find you and find the podcast?
Well, we have a website, just ItalianAmericanStories.com. We're on all the podcast platforms, wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on all of the social media. If you just type in Italian American Stories podcast, you'll find us. So, yeah.
Well, that's
and
great.
YouTube. We're on YouTube as well.
Yes, and people have to, we got to get you monetized. So we have to
yes, absolutely.
make sure a lot of people watch. Like we were saying before, we have to help each other out. I think, there's two communities. There's those of us, the little people, let's call them that really, help each other out. And then there's the other ones, but we won't talk about that.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, we won't bring that up. Well, Stephanie, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. It's great to be able to. How's it feel to be on the other side, huh?
It's great. Yep, it's definitely a nice little change of pace when you do interviews for sure.
People ask me sometimes, do you, I said, how do you feel about it? And I said, it's like a relief to be on the other side. It's like so much easier.
I know. I just have to talk about what I do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Really had a good time. Thank you.